is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Cincinnati, Ohio is a craft beer wonderland. The largest metro area in the state is home to around 60 breweries, including heavy hitters like Rheingeist and Mad Tree. Brewing is in the city's blood. The Queen City is one corner of the so-called German Triangle, a tract of the Midwest stretching from Cincinnati to St. Louis to Milwaukee that saw heavy German immigration during the mid-19th century. A failed political revolution in 1848 saw Germans leave their homeland in droves, and many settled in the growing industrial cities and verdant farmland of the Midwest. Many of these German immigrants brought with them a taste for the lager beer styles of their homeland, and often the knowledge and gumption to establish breweries to brew lager commercially. A neighborhood of Cincinnati just north of downtown became known as Over the Rhine because crossing the Miami-Erie Canal into the neighborhood was said to be like crossing the Rhine River into Germany. Streets had German names, and church services and schools were offered in German as late as the turn of the 20th century. Over the Rhine became the city's brewery district, with multiple breweries churning out lager styles for the masses. At one point, Christian Moerlein Brewing, founded by the eponymous German immigrant, was the 10th largest brewery in the country. By the turn of the 21st century, Over the Rhine was an economically depressed neighborhood full of crumbling buildings and racial unrest. You'd never know this now. For better or worse, and there are defenders of both, Over the Rhine has transformed. It's been fully gentrified and is now the city's hip nightlife district. And brewing has returned, with numerous craft breweries filling once vacant buildings. Plenty could be said about the social consequences of the neighborhood's rapid evolution, with rising rent driving out former residents and wholly converting the area into a playground for citizens with expendable income. But the neighborhood hasn't really looked back, and the restoration and preservation of its historical architecture has been a sight to see. Join me today as we talk with a chocolate maker and a brewer who are working their crafts in Over the Rhine and helping to write the next chapter in one of Cincinnati's most storied neighborhoods. In today's episode, we'll talk with Paul Picton of Maverick Chocolate about his collaborations with Cincinnati area craft breweries, as well as with Chris Siegman, the head brewer at the Sam Adams Cincinnati taproom, who recently used Maverick cacao in a bourbon barrel-aged stout. One public institution has remained unchanged throughout Over the Rhine's tumultuous history. Findlay Market is the oldest continually operating public market in Ohio and originally opened in 1855. In addition to a thriving farmers market, the market hosts eateries, kitchen incubators, and numerous artisan makers. One of those is Maverick Chocolate, a bean-to-bar chocolate company founded by Paul and Marlene Picton after Paul's retirement. As an engineer traveling the world selling jet engines, he often brought home chocolate, and after retiring in 2013, the Pictons needed a new source for their chocolate habit, so they decided to make it themselves. In 2014, they opened Maverick Chocolate in Findlay Market. Accolades followed quickly, and they now have 2 locations in the city. With so many great breweries around, it was perhaps inevitable Maverick would collaborate with many of them. Back in the fall, I talked with Paul about these collaborations, beer and chocolate pairings, and why beer and chocolate work so well together. After our conversation, we'll hear from Chris Siegman, the head brewer of the Sam Adams Cincinnati taproom. For Valentine's Day, Sam Adams brewed a beer using Maverick cacao and then sold the beer and chocolate together as a gift set. Before we talk about that, though, let's hear about Maverick's other collaborations. Paul starts out by talking about a beer from Taft's Ale House, a brewery located in the beautifully restored building that once housed St. Paul's Evangelical Church, built in 1850.
I mean, we've worked with probably a dozen different breweries locally. The real start of that was working with Kevin Moreland at Taft's Ale House. And he'd come into the shop right as he was getting the ale house prepared. This was back spring of 2014, I believe. It was like, this aroma was just amazing. He's like, how do I capture this aroma? And so we sort of went through the process of what we're doing, which makes us different from a chocolatier or other chocolate shops, with the fact that we're roasting our own beans. And that was the aroma that he was very interested in. Like, hey, how am I going to capture this? So we brought him some cocoa husks, which is the shells from the cocoa beans. We brought him some actual roasted cocoa nibs, and he started to experiment with them and do, I think, some different trials. And it worked out quite well. So, they started the Maverick Porter there at Taft's. I think that came on their opening weekend. And as far as I understand, it's been on tap ever since. It's been canned several times. They're just canning 3 batches of it as we speak. So I think it's been pretty popular. And, so that was sort of what got us started into working with craft. And then more and more as we opened, in some cases breweries would be referred because they've talked to Kevin, or in other cases, they were like, hey, we're looking for some chocolate for our beer. What can we do? And so, I think that's how, like Christian Moerlein, just sort of came by like, oh, we think this sounds good. Rheingeist, the same idea. I mean, they're in our neighborhood at Finley Market. And then a few others people that we've known sort of independently, like the guys down at Braxton were classmates of our sons. And so we sort of got a, invite that way. And then that brought us to Mad Tree, which we've been doing the Rubus cacao with them for quite a few years. We did the Gratitude last year with them as well. And, it started to go. And then we've had a lot of good success with a lot of the smaller local ones, Darkness in Bellevue, Woodburn, Fretboard, which is where, Kevin Moreland is working these days. So, I think those things have been nice kinds of collaborations.
Have you had a chance to try a lot of these beers? What do you think of them?
I try every one if at all possible, and I like them a lot. And the real convert though is my wife Marlene, who's really our chief chocolate maker. That prior to trying the Maverick Porter at Taft's, basically said she's not a beer drinker. She's like, I'll just have wine, because most of the typical beers that were sold in America just didn't appeal to her, and certainly not the IPA styles. So when we tried something that was more chocolatey, but more malty, she's like, oh, I like this, and now she's a real big porter fan. So we go out places, she's looking for, a porter or a Russian Imperial Stout or something like this. And she's like, I had no idea beer could taste like this. So it's made a big convert of hers. I'd say her favorite beer right now is the one that Darkness makes with our cocoa nibs called the Mayan Sacrifice. And it's an amber Imperial Stout. So it's not as dark as a traditional Russian one, but and I think they put a little lactose in it. So she describes it as chocolate ice cream. And so that's sort of her go-to beer these days when we get the chance. So it's been overall a very good experience. Everybody does a slightly different variation. Beer gives us that opportunity for, the brewmaster to come up with a unique recipe. So even if they're using very similar ingredients, they've got a lot of ways to make it their own. And that's certainly what we see. There's chocolate notes, but there's so many other things that make it very interesting.
So how does the process work for selecting the beans that are going to go to a particular brewery? Do they say, we want these flavors, and you figure out what goes with that? Do you talk together about what makes sense? How does that actually work?
So we've sort of seen a whole gambit of how those work. Some of the breweries were very concerned about the flavor notes that were already in the beans, because I have about a dozen different beans from around the world that do have unique flavors. And so in some cases that's, we want to make sure that what we were going for with the beer wasn't going to conflict. So we tend to get a lot of fruit notes in our cocoa beans. And so if that isn't the kind of thing that the brewmaker wanted, then we wanted to make sure we picked something that was just more chocolatey. So we usually have a range of beans available that we can do something like that with. So, we always have beans that are more chocolatey than anything else. We use those to make things like our milk chocolate or espresso chocolate. Again, we don't want other flavors, but some like the Rubus cacao with Mad Tree, which is a raspberry chocolate. We picked a bean which is from Madagascar that naturally has a red berry flavor to it, so that heightens the raspberry note that they added into there, and is very complimentary. So we've done both. In most cases, I said the brewmasters know what kind of flavor profile they're looking for. So most cases they rely on me to sort of provide them with the bean that is going to work, and it isn't something that they then have to try to fight with.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. You mentioned with the very first one with Taps Ale House that you had initially provided them with some cacao husks. Is pretty much what you're always giving them just the beans, or are there any unusual variants that you've come across?
Pretty much always both the husks and the nibs, and because they get put into the beer at different stages of the process. So the husks are often used at the boil at the beginning in order to, I think it adds a lot of color. I'm not really brewmaster, so I may get some of the terms wrong, but that was my understanding is they get a lot of the color out of that. And then they tend to put the nibs in near the end of the ferment, 1 or 2 days before the beer is ready to be canned or kegged. And that sort of provides that extra shot of flavor at the end. That being said, I know they've sort of varied that in all different directions. I think the key for a lot of them was the fact that using actually cocoa nibs instead of like actual chocolate, and that it doesn't gum up the system. They don't get all the cocoa butter and artificial ingredients in the chocolate bars that gum it up. So the nibs come out very clean, and I understand that most of them just repurpose that with all the rest of their grains that usually go off to local farms. So I think the cows and pigs get to enjoy a bit of chocolate as well.
Well, that's nice. Enrich their lives a little bit.
Absolutely. It tastes good.
Does this collaboration ever work in the other direction? Have you used any beer ingredients or beer infusion or anything like that in any chocolate bars?
Yes, we do. We've done a couple of different ways. We usually put beer into truffles. So we make a filled chocolate. And we've done a few where we've taken some of the Braxton ones that have been pretty popular, and we've infused that into the cream ganache. So we take the cream and the beer and chocolate, and we basically boil those together, and that we then pipe into the truffles. We've also done some where we've come full circle, where we take the Mayan sacrifice from darkness that had our chocolate in it, then use that beer to make the golden stout truffle. And so we've then sort of started it full circle with the chocolate that went to the beer that then came back to the chocolate. So, and that's been very popular whenever we make those. So we've also done some with other flavors. For St. Patrick's Day this year, we made a whole collection of Irish themed chocolate. So we used Guinness to make some truffles. We used some Jameson and cream to make Irish cream. And then we also used just the straight Jameson to make Irish whiskey truffles. So we had a collection of 3 different flavors of Irish we made a limited batch because until now, St. Patrick's Day was not a chocolate holiday, but we're trying to make it one.
There you
And
go. Every holiday should be a chocolate holiday, right?
I fully agree. That was one of my employees' suggestions, like, hey, why don't we do something for St. Patrick's Day? And sure, let's do it. And so I think it was a limited thing. I think we made, I forget what it was, about 40 or 50 six-piece sets, but they sold out almost immediately. So we'll probably do it again next year.
It seems like there's just wide collaboration between the craft beer world and the bean to bar chocolate world. Do you have any thoughts on why those two creative industries just seem to partner so well together?
I think because in both cases, they're both the brewmasters, the chocolate makers, and the customers are much more, I think, taste sensitive, are interested in fine flavors. You drink a craft beer because you want those interesting flavors that are in there. Otherwise, you just go buy something, commercial off the shelf. And the same is with the chocolate that, what we're making as a unique single origin chocolate bar is radically different than what's in the grocery store shelves. So I think, that Venn diagram crosses over quite heavily in that, we're both working on a food product. We're creating our own recipes and then going out, finding the ingredients that we want to be able to make that vision happen. I see them as very similar in that fashion, in that we're basically doing the same thing with just a slightly different medium. And I think because of that, I think the relationships are usually quite good. We understand a lot of what each other is talking about. We talk about different flavor notes and tasting notes. A big part for me that helped when my wife and I were first starting the business. We were making bars at our home and trying to figure out, okay, did we get this flavor right? Is this working good? And it was my homebrew friends who were the best testers for us. We have a lot of, friends, relatives who are like, yeah, this tastes great. Okay, that doesn't really help me a lot. I need to know more. What are you tasting? What are you not tasting? It should taste like this. I put this ingredient in. Did you notice this or that? Is there anything that's off? And homebrewers certainly had a much more sophisticated palate in that they were able to identify a lot more of those flavors for us. And so I feel a strong indebtedness to homebrewers for really helping us to sort of get started and to help us refine our palate. One of the other ways that we've collaborated, sort of going, call it the opposite way, is I've done quite a few beer and chocolate pairings. And so, I've done that, with even quite a few, bigger breweries, Great Lakes, Jackie O's, Sam Adams, where I bring in a whole collection of chocolate and I sit down with their brewers and we sort of figure out, okay, this pairs well with this and this one with that one. And then, we invite the public in and they, sell the seats. And I talk about chocolate and the brewers talk about the beer and we do that. So similar to a wine and chocolate pairing, but beer provides us so many more flavor profiles to work with. So the way I always think of it is, if I'm talking about red wine, regardless of the variety, the flavor band is still relatively narrow. Where you get into beer, well, now you've got such a huge range. You've got bitterness units, you've got flavor, there's some that, you put fruit in, some you don't. And so there's so much more complexity in flavor with beer, which means I've got a lot more chocolate options that I can then pair with. That being said, pretty much any dark chocolate will work okay with pretty much any red wine. That is not a true statement with beer. There are plenty of beer chocolate pairings that you're like, okay, that was a bad idea. We won't be doing that again. But that's why we do the practice ahead of time, and that's worked out well. We did several with Listerman's this spring right before the whole virus thing shut us down. And so that worked out well for us. One of my employees is, taking the Cincinnati State Brewmaster program. And so he understands chocolate. He's been working here a couple of years and he's, taking the beer. So he's always interested to be involved in those kind of collaborations. And so he did those tastings. And I think that worked out well because you see the passion in both sides. And to me, that's the real benefit of working with, especially the home brews, microbreweries. You're talking to the actual brewer. Here's, the man or woman who created this recipe and then made it happen. And you're talking to the chocolate maker that did the same. And so we tend to be passionate about what we're doing and what we've created. So I think that comes across when we talk about chocolate or talk about beer. And I think that's why those kind of pairings have always been a good success.
Do you have any particular memorable individual pairings from some of those that you've done with a particular beer and one of your chocolates that really stood out to you?
One of the pairings that we did that I think was a surprise was we have a bar we call the Fahrenheit 513 that has spices and chilies in it. So it's got a little bit of heat and not the kind of thing that you would think would pair very well, but it actually worked extremely well with one of Great Lakes IPAs. And I forgot the name. You would probably know. It's one of their more famous ones.
Commodore Perry is their classic.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Commodore Perry. I think we were all surprised when we were going through doing the tasting because something that's spicy, you sort of don't think that necessarily pairs with the beer. But the bitterness that we got from the hops in the IPA, I think actually was a very nice complement to the little bit of heat that came from the chocolate. So that was probably one of the biggest surprise ones. On the reverse side, any milk chocolate with a Pilsner is a bad idea.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that.
Yes. So again, the first few times when we were trying these things, I've not tried some of those, and I just brought a whole collection. All right, here's all my different bars. Let's just try things. And I think we pretty much agreed that milk chocolate with something like a Pilsner did not go so well. I'd say one of the things that works with a lot of beer still is white chocolate. It's a little bit sweeter, doesn't have a lot of its own strong flavor, but it does help to enhance the flavors that are coming from the beer. Just because chocolate made with cocoa butter tends to sort of coat your mouth so that when you then have a sip of the alcohol, it sort of mixes together and you tend to get sort of a heightened flavor experience. So it's not adding anything. It's more like putting in HDR mode.
Switching gears just a bit from beer, I believe one of your most popular bars is the Prohibition Milk made with bourbon. Can you tell me a little bit about that bar and how that came about?
Yeah, that bar is made with bourbons. Evan Williams. It was actually the brainchild of one of my home brewer friends who was also a bourbon fan. He's like, you need to figure out a way to make bourbon and chocolate. And so we did some experimentation. And as far as I know, I think we basically invented the process of infusing bourbon into cocoa nibs. I think it's since been repeated, but at the time, 6 years ago when we started it, I think we were the only ones who had figured out how to do that. And so by getting the bourbon into the nibs themselves helps to keep the flavor enhanced. So other people have put nibs into like bourbon barrels, but the flavor was just too muted. So it takes about 10 bottles of bourbon to make a batch of 400 bars. So there's quite a bit of bourbon in there. Yeah. And we basically infuse it into there, dehydrate them, and then use those in a similar process to how we would make our milk chocolate. So the cocoa beans are ground. We add a bit of milk powder, a bit of sugar, and then we sprinkle it with bourbon barrel smoked sea salt that we get from Bourbon Foods down in Louisville. Sort of, again, completes the whole bourbon cycle. Started with in a barrel, came to us, so we put it into chocolate, and then the barrel itself was smoked to then make the salt that goes on top. And so that's become our best seller. I think the combination of the sweet with the salty just sort of throws our little monkey brains into a bit of a tizzy and says, yeah, this is good. I like that. It's won silver medal at the International Chocolate Awards twice. It's been well recognized. We sell that to our wholesale stores more than any other bar. So it's made us a big hit on the west coast of the country. I think there's about 8 stores now in the greater San Francisco area that carry our chocolate, and specifically the Prohibition bar. We're making a splash out there as well. But, so that's something that for us takes probably about 2 months to be able to prepare a batch. It's a lengthy process to do the infusion. So for us, that's always been a fun spirit to use. I live in Kentucky, so I sort of feel honor bound to use something when Party Source had their 25th anniversary 2 years ago. We did a special batch for them with OKI bourbon that was prepared as part of what New Riff was doing. I've done bourbon and chocolate pairings as well. Did one just 2 weeks ago with New Riff. Again, there's a lot of nuances in bourbon, and chocolate tends to bring those out. Next on my list is try and do something with Scotch. I'm more of a single malt kind of guy. So that's my next experimentation.
Where does the name Maverick come from?
We came up with Maverick because we wanted something to sort of reflect that what we were doing was very different from the Mars, Hershey's, Godivas of the world, from the kind of beans we get, how we source them, how we process. But at the same time, I didn't really want to be an outlaw or a rebel. And so we sort of settled on Maverick as, something that sort of demonstrated, reflected a bit of that independent spirit, the swimming upstream type of thing, willing to sort of stand your ground, willing to be different. And I think that sort of now is aptly fitting for, how we make chocolate and sort of our position on, the child slave labor and all the other issues that affect not just chocolate, but coffee and all those things. So, what we do is quite different from the big guys. And so I think it's an apt description, and we like to then celebrate other Mavericks who are out there. And so all of our packages have crazy flying machines on them because those early aviators were Mavericks in their own right. And so those are the things that we try to celebrate. Our newest store, Rookwood Commons, has a replica of Harriet Quimby's airplane hanging from the ceiling. And she was the Maverick. She was the first American woman to have a pilot's license. They wouldn't give her one here in America, so she had to go to France, learn how to fly across the English Channel, and make international news before they would give her a license. So she was a Maverick, and we, again, want to try to celebrate that kind of spirit of boldness and not just accepting the status quo, but willing to step up and make a difference.
One brewery doing just that is Mad Tree Brewing on the city's northeast side. Their name is meant to represent the brewery's dual commitment to art and science, creativity and precision, nature and engineering. And they donate 1% of sales to environmental nonprofits through their 1% for the Planet initiative. Their Rubus Cacao is a 7% ABV stout brewed with raspberry puree and Dominican cacao nibs from Maverick. The beer is like a chocolate-covered raspberry, with bright raspberry carrying sweet and tart elements that get bathed and enveloped by the chocolatey robe of the beer, that, despite the dessert-like flavors, finishes dry enough to remain enjoyably drinkable. The most recent brewery Maverick has partnered with needs little introduction. Sam Adams, the better-known name for the Boston Beer Company, was founded in Boston in 1984 by Jim Koch and has become one of the largest craft breweries in the country, introducing countless beer drinkers to the world of craft beer. The brewery had long had a production facility in Cincinnati and decided to open a taproom in Over the Rhine in 2018. They tapped Chris Siegman, formerly of respected area breweries Mount Carmel and 50 West, to head up brewing operations at the new Showcase taproom. For Valentine's Day, Sam Adams partnered with Maverick to release Black Forest Gateau, a burly Imperial Stout brewed with cherry juice and Tanzanian cacao, and aged for 8 months in bourbon barrels. Barrel-aged beers aren't quick projects, and the groundwork for this one was laid closer to last year's Valentine's Day for its 2021 release. The brewery offered the elegant beer, packaged in stately 750 milliliter bottles, in a gift package with a bar of Maverick's Tanzania 80% dark chocolate made with the same cacao. I talked with Chris recently about shaping this beer from the ground up and how the project opened his eyes to the possibilities of bean-to-bar chocolate.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a taproom, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing.
So Black Forest Gateau was kind of, I don't know, kind of a pet project of mine, and it actually has kind of like a wider scope. I had kind of had this idea a while back. I don't know, there's, I guess, a lot of interest in beer cocktails now and kind of merging categories. So I kind of, wanted to take that a little bit step further and actually kind of focus on a beer cocktail and then, use that spirit, whatever it would be, and barrel age that beer in that spirit barrel. So for instance, this one is Black Forest Gateau, which it's a German chocolate cake to begin with. They ripped off of that and made a bourbon drink off of the German chocolate cake, which is, cherries, chocolate, in this instance, vanilla, but trying to play off that cake and trying to play off that cocktail that was inspired by the cake. I have a few more of these coming up down the pipeline. I've got stuff aging in rum barrels and other kind of spirit barrels. So,
are those with chocolate or just other cocktail ideas?
No, there'll be other cocktails. So I've got one that's like almost like a daiquiri inspired, kind of almost tart ale with a bunch of different fruits that's in coconut rum barrels right now. So Maverick Chocolate, obviously they're neighbors of ours. We're both down in Over the Rhine, basically in that Findlay Market corner. Just personally, I go there and pick chocolates all the time, just for me, myself, my kids. We just get treats there. And we wanted to do something special here. We realized that this beer was very chocolate heavy and was going to be released around Valentine's Day. So we thought this could be a great chance to work together. So we went over there, got a bunch of different chocolates from them, sat down, tasted them, and drank, did pairings with the different with the beer and with different chocolate bars, and then kind of picked one that we thought really elevated both of our products. So that's kind of how that went.
And you used the Tanzania cacao, is that right?
Correct. Yep.
What made you go with that one? Why did that work best?
So that one actually, because of the dark chocolate nature of it, had like a little bit of a bitterness. Obviously, dark chocolate is a little more bitter than milk chocolate, but because of that, it really brought out the cherry notes to me of the beer. It actually then brought out the actual chocolate notes of the bar. So it was really this almost like symbiotic relationship. Like some of the other stuff, like there was I can't remember the actual bar off the top of my head, but it was kind of a little bit more, had more milk chocolate in it. And though it was great, it didn't elevate either of them. So they kind of like were almost fighting with each other with some flavor components. So this one actually really brought out this like dark fruit characteristic. And then the chocolate bar was elevated by the beer. So it was, to be honest, it was a really, really great pairing.
Can you share a little bit of the process for actually building this beer from a recipe development standpoint? I mean, what goes into incorporating the cacao in the finished beer?
Starts with an idea. You're trying to make a beer that initially tastes like a chocolate cake. It's going to go into bourbon barrels, so it's going to be getting some barrel character and some oak character. So starting off with like a little bit of a sweeter base than I would on anything else. So the process is to basically brew an Imperial Stout, but probably not one that would be as heavy on the roast character or heavy on the bitterness as it would if I was just going to brew it to put it on tap immediately. So knowing it's going to get about 8 months into a barrel, there's going to be some like oak tannin, some spirit character that actually will come out and kind of create a balance for it. Just knowing that going in, creating a sweeter, kind of more chocolate versus roast stout, which is more heavy on like more like a chocolate malt versus like a roasted malt. And then from there, letting the barrel do what it does and pull out those like vanilla, oak, and spirit character. And then going back in afterwards, pulling that out, putting it on vanilla beans to really smooth it out. And then we actually took cocoa nibs and I toasted them through our pizza oven and then threw that in as well. And that got it probably sat on vanilla beans and cocoa nibs for about 2 or 3 weeks until it was ready to be pulled. So actually the cherry puree went in during the fermentation so that could ferment out because it's got a lot of sugars in it we didn't want to leave that residual sugar behind. So that's kind of the process.
When you taste the finished beer, are you able to kind of directly recognize that cacao that you used, or do you feel like it changes a little during the process?
So I think immediately it had an impact to me, and it's really in the finish. The finish has a very lingering dark chocolate note to me, beyond what I could get out of any malt that I've ever tried. I'm very interested to see what it will taste like in, say, 3 months or 6 months or a year from now. Just in my experience with barrel-aged beers in general is that flavors tend to meld and morph and create different flavors. So who knows what, in 6 months, maybe the cherries really start shining through and, the chocolate takes a back note or the vanilla does or something like that.
Are you able to share what bourbon barrel you were using?
No problem. Those are New Rip. So we've got a great relationship with those guys over there, and I love their product. Their bourbon is fantastic. So, and they're really close, so I can easily go grab some barrels when needed. We are a small brew pub here, so I don't need too many at a time, and sometimes getting them shipped from a barrel broker or one of the Lexington or Louisville, it's not really worth it to get maybe a handful of barrels, and the shipping price doesn't really make sense. So it's really nice to have these guys to be able to help me out.
You mentioned that you and your kids would get the chocolate when you would go into Findlay Market and stuff. Did this process change your relationship to Bean to Bar chocolate in any way? Do you feel like you have a deeper appreciation for it than you did before?
Absolutely. And I mean, the more I try it too, there's just so many it's like beer. You could probably really go down the rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. They've been doing it probably just as long as beer. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's an art, and it's, the more I get into it, the more I appreciate it.
Do you have future plans for working with Maverick or other chocolate makers for future beers?
Nothing directly in the pipeline, but the relationship we built with them, I really enjoy, and any chance that we get, I will probably be definitely reaching out to Maverick again and kind of see where that goes.
What's the response been like so far to this beer?
Very positive. The reviews have been very positive. Any feedback that I've gotten just from the front of house team has been very positive. So feel somewhat validated that it was a good idea.
What story is this beer telling?
So this beer, this is a treat. This is a dessert. This is something that you have earned. It's a rewarding drink, and also for sharing. So I still have this Valentine's Day package idea in my head here. So it is kind of like a rewarding, we'll say a job well done. Let's share our successes together, something like that.
Sam Adams Black Forest Gateau pours thick and silky smooth from the bottle and immediately lifts cherry and chocolate notes to the nose. The mouth is full and warming from the formidable 10.9% ABV and rich with boozy chocolate-covered cherry notes. And after a few sips, the oak and bourbon notes from the barrel come through, rounding out the flavor. Tasting the Maverick Tanzania bar beside it is intriguing. The bar starts out with a mushroom-like earthiness that elevates into sun-warmed oak and then flowers outward with citrus and berry flavors. It's bright and robust and stands up admirably to its bold liquid partner. As Chris said, this is a beer and a chocolate for celebrating. Cincinnati in 2021 is a far cry from its 19th century roots as a stop westward on the mighty Ohio River, and its subsequent role as a hub for pork production, manufacturing, and, as more Germans stepped off the riverboats, lager brewing. The city today is full of great beer, spirits, food, and, thanks to Maverick, great chocolate as well. When it's safe to do so again, give the Queen City a visit and tell Paul and Chris I said hello. You can learn more about Paul and Maverick Chocolate, as well as Chris and Sam Adams Cincinnati, in the show notes, where you'll also find links to some of the other breweries and beers mentioned in this episode. In the next episode of Bean to Barstool, we'll talk with Karina Jimenez of Choco by Karina, a chocolate maker of Venezuelan descent who now makes chocolate on the south coast of Norway, as well as David Graham, a brewer at nearby Lervig Beer, with whom Karina has collaborated on an unusual and delightful chocolate bar. That will come out on Tuesday, April 6th. If there's a topic you'd like to see covered on this podcast, drop me a line through social media or at beantobarstool@gmail.com. You can also let me know if you've had good chocolate beers or beer-infused chocolate, or if you come across any you think I would find interesting, or even if you just have an interesting reflection on the tasting process. If you feel inspired to share one of your own beer and chocolate pairings on Instagram, tag the post with the Bean to Barstool hashtag so I can see it and comment. Let your friends know about this show if you think they would enjoy it, and of course, please leave a review on your preferred listening platform so more people can find the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.